Welcome to This Explainer. You know, we talk a lot about the broad history of the Great Descent, but today, we're skipping all that. We are plunging straight into the freezing, crushing depths of the year 2978. We're going to look at a truly chilling turning point in the Third Millennium conflict.
So, I want you to think about something. What happens when humanity's greatest predator actually shows mercy? It's a total paradox, right? We're talking about a specific moment that completely defied the brutal mechanical logic of this planetary war. And honestly, it shattered everything we thought we knew about our deep-sea invaders.
Part 1. A War at a Standstill. Okay, to really understand this anomaly, we have to grasp the sheer apocalyptic scale of the macro conflict. Picture a world in absolute deadlock. On one side, you've got the remaining forces of the human alliance, backed all the way into heavily fortified, freezing mountain redoubts. And on the other side, the Abyssal cephalopoda. They're ruling from this glowing megacity literally 6 miles deep in the Mariana Trench, operating under extreme hydrostatic pressure. It's a war split strictly by altitude and depth. Basically, neither side can survive in the other's domain.
Part 2. Trapped in the Abyss.
But, wars are ultimately experienced on the micro level. Let's look at Commander Maya Lin. She's all alone, piloting an experimental deep reconnaissance craft in the absolute freezing dark. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a violent tectonic shift triggers an underwater turbidity current. Her primary ballast systems get critically damaged. Her tiny titanium shell is pinned against the trench wall at a sheer, incomprehensible depth of 7,200 meters. That is incredibly deep. She's totally disabled, entirely out of range of human alliance recovery fleets, and slowly dying as her life support begins to fail under thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch.
Part 3. The Bioluminescent Bridge.
So out of the pitch-black ocean, a 100-foot biomechanical bioship approaches. Intelligence later designated this thing as Subject Zero. Now, by all established rules of this war, Lin should have been crushed or harvested immediately, no questions asked. But instead, it extends these bioluminescent tendrils and just encircles her crippled vessel. And they sit there in the dark for 14 agonizing hours. Just imagine the grueling, claustrophobic terror of that standoff for a second. Lin is trapped in her freezing microsubmersible, her oxygen is steadily dwindling, and she's staring out at a hyper-intelligent apex predator that could pulverize her with a single kinetic twitch.
But here's the crazy part. Subject Zero wasn't attacking. It was actually communicating via high-frequency 470 nanometer blue-green light modulation. That happens to be the exact spectrum of their deep-sea quantum networks. Lin realizes this and does something absolutely brilliant. She bypasses her weapons interface and manually rewires her exterior floodlights to mirror those exact pulses back. She initiates the very first two-way optical conversation, feeding those light patterns directly into her sub's neuroacoustic translator.
Part 4. Translating alien empathy.
The translation that came back is really the emotional climax of our story here. It completely pulled back the curtain on the invaders' deeply complex internal psychology and proved they weren't just some monolithic, mindless hive. The translator decoded 3 core spatial emotional concepts. First, the alien expressed an acute awareness of the fleeting nature of human existence. Second, it communicated this profound sorrow over its own oceanic conquest of Earth. And third, and this is the most shocking part, it held a tragic compassion for the human resistance. This data completely shattered humanity's foundational understanding of their enemy.
That first translation is just haunting. It goes, "Short-lived wanderers of the dry earth. Your minds flicker in the thin atmosphere, disconnected from the profound vibrations of the deep." The entity wasn't looking at Lin as a military target at all. Honestly, it viewed her as this fragile, single-brained creature breathing thin gas, totally untethered from the massive, multi-threaded biological resonance that the Abyssals experience every day.
And then came a really shocking revelation of moral ambivalence. It said, "Our vast descent was driven by necessity, but in doing so, we turned your shallow seas into a tomb." The oceanic conquest wasn't born of malice. It was actually an act of desperate biological survival that this specific alien caste deeply, deeply regretted.
Finally, we get this. You wage war with shattered iron against the crushing force of 1,000 oceans. A doomed struggle, yet you shine so intensely before breaking. Just let that sink in for a moment. Humanity, with all of our hypersonic bombers and supercavitating torpedoes, wasn't viewed as a formidable threat. We were viewed with profound, overwhelming pity, kind of like a wounded bird trying to fight a hurricane.
And this wasn't just words either. When Lin's life support systems critically failed in that freezing 1 to 4 degree water, Subject Zero actually performed a physical act of mercy. It generated a localized biothermal aura. This massive, 100-foot creature literally wrapped the tiny titanium shell in a cocoon of conductive heat. It kept Commander Lin from freezing to death until human recovery teams finally detected her location.
Part 5. The Psychological Front. So, Subject Zero vanished before the Alliance fleets even arrived, but the data Lin brought back changed the war forever. It fractured the human military apparatus right down the middle and opened up an entirely new battlefield. On one side, you had military hardliners who viewed the interaction purely as a deceptive, sophisticated psychological tactic designed to soften human resolve. But on the other side, diplomatic factions argued this was undeniable proof of a caste schism within the alien ranks. They saw it as evidence of a faction that could potentially be appealed to for a negotiated ceasefire. Now, we aren't here to say who was right or wrong, but this single event forced humanity to look at its exterminators in a completely new light.
Ultimately, Commander Lin was put in charge of the Exolinguistic Division, and that birthed what became known as the Lin Protocol. Instead of kinetic weapons, they built a global network of deep-sea acoustic arrays. The goal? To broadcast human art, philosophy, and the literal biometric data of our suffering directly into the alien quantum networks. They essentially took Lin's miraculous discovery of alien empathy and weaponized it, trying to trigger existential doubt and internal rebellion within the invaders' ranks.
Which brings us to a really haunting crossroad in our understanding of this conflict. Is weaponized empathy enough to win a war of extinction? Can humanity leverage the pity of its greatest enemy to survive? Or are we simply broadcasting our final brilliant flicker of light before the pressure breaks us completely? That is the chilling reality of the third millennium. Thank you so much for diving into this explainer with me today.